r/AskReddit. What's your creepiest glitch in the Matrix or unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? I was working on my motorcycle in a dirt lot where I had crashed it trying to do a sick drift, breaking off the clutch lever and the gear shifter. I had brought a wrench set with me and I was using one of them to take off a bolt when I put it down on the ground to finish unscrewing the bolt with my hand. 2 minutes later I went to pick it back up and it was gone. I ran all around this dirt lot looking for it to no avail. Luckily I had a spare in the car. Fixed the bike and drove back to my apartment to shower as I was filthy. I walked in my room and sitting on my desk was the wrench. I was dumbfounded. Taking the trash out at night. Super remote area, so I know for a fact we are the only ones around here. Getting close to the road and I hear very clearly, "Help me," from a female voice. Even knowing there's such a slim chance of there being another living person around, I still feel like I should look around and check it out in case I wasn't just hearing things and someone actually needs help. Take about 2 steps in the direction I thought I heard it, hear a giggle in the same exact voice, turn around and walk promptly back up the driveway, because duck that shit. Anyone who actually needed help wouldn't be laughing. I don't think. When I was a child my sister and I were walking home from the park and a man called, "Help." We found an open manhole and could hear the man calling for help, but we could not see him. I was 9 and panicking thought we should crawl in to help. My sister, 11, had the good instinct to get our parents. When we came back with them the man was gone. As an adult I can see the whole thing was a ploy, the manhole right next to the park. It makes complete sense, but is still so creepy. Similar experience, walking home in a residential neighborhood at night. I was 14 at the time and this car is driving behind me very slowly, too slowly. It pulls over about 5 feet ahead of me and stops. Alarm bells were already ringing at that time, and I book it home. Just pure adrenaline, I burst through the front door, hyperventilating. Managed to get out what happened to my dad who takes off sprinting down the street. Sure enough dad finds the car and is like, "What's going on, man?" The guy laughs and says his car died. He must have really scared me for me to run like that. Hardy ha. Good laugh at my expense. Dad says, "I'll be right back, I'll jump you." Dad goes back literally under 2 minutes. This was maybe half football fields away from my house, but not a straight shot, and guy isn't there. Well, guess who's laughing now? No one, because it was terrifying. I once clocked out of work at 6 p.m, like I always did at the time, and began my hour-long train ride home. After I had found a seat, I went to sleep and woke up just before my station. From the station, it is a short bus journey, 10 to 15 minutes, to reach home. During the entire journey, I didn't use my phone and I don't wear a watch, so I didn't really notice the time anywhere. When I reached home, my family surprised me with, "You're home early, everything alright?" I look at the wall clock, and it is about to be 6 p.m. I was too shocked to understand what happened. Checked other watches, cell phones, etc. And the time is absolutely right. A few days later, the admin emailed us the timesheets for the month, times clocking in and out, and every single days for me was around the same 6 p.m. So it certainly wasn't me having left work earlier. To this date, I haven't figured out how I gained between 60 to 90 minutes that day. The only reasonable explanation I can assume would be either daylight savings, or someone just messed with the clock, assuming you left, based on an analog clock at your work. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a street light, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve/oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Maybe your wife woke up and was asking these same questions out loud while you were still asleep. You subconsciously heard her and in those few seconds formed your own dream based on what she said. Then you woke up while she was still asking the questions that caused your dream. I'm 100% sure I vividly remember a dog that apparently doesn't exist. When I was 16 we lived on the other side of the province and my uncle had this little Jack Russell named Crew. Crew went missing for several months and then turned up at a humane society over an hour away and we were all shocked this little dog has made it so far. Anyway, that was almost 20 years ago and the other day I was talking to my parents and was like, whenever I hear about Jack Russells I think about Crew and that stunt he pulled, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Insisted my uncle had never had such a dog, I must have dreamed it, etc. Honestly, anyone else who would have remembered this dog has been dead for a long time and I don't even have any pictures of my uncle. I have absolutely no way to prove this dog existed, but I'm sure that he did. They may have just forgotten. My parents are like this as well. Not that long ago I was telling them about a letter I had written to my dad while he was away a few years ago. They both insisted I must have dreamt it, but I found it not long after. Sometimes people can be forgetful. It doesn't necessarily mean Crew didn't exist. I was driving about 50 miles per hour and a car ran a stop sign on an on-ramp and pulled out right in front of me. I remember bracing for impact. And then, suddenly, I was about 300 yards down the highway and I saw the car at the ramp in my rear view, just about to pull out. You died on the spot and your mind is living an alternate timeline. I was driving during a snowstorm when a police car started driving next to me, lights on, no sirens. I looked at the officers, but they didn't look at me. They had a weird look on their face. Something was off. They accelerated just a little to pass me and then completely disappeared. I drove maybe 15 minutes on the road without seeing them anywhere. They couldn't have gone really far. The road's conditions were terrible. I was creeped out for a long time. I was walking my dog and I was almost to the driveway when I looked down for some reason and I looked back up and I ended up being back at the road about 6 blocks away from where I thought I was. I was so confused, but my dog looked completely fine. For your information, I don't drink or do drugs. I'm still pretty young. I'm 99% convinced this happened to me as a teenager and no one believes me. A friend and I both worked Wednesday mornings at the same time, different places, so I would pick her up and drop her off, then go to my work. One day I got to her house, and I remember thinking that I need to call her to let her know I'm here, but all of a sudden the phone call is there minutes in, and she's just saying my name over and over asking why I'm just sitting there. I remember feeling weak, and my arm holding my phone, left-handed, was so hard to pick up to my ear. Apparently I called her, then just blanked out. She saw from the window, answered me call, and kept asking if I was okay, because I just sat there in my car like a deer in headlights. To this day I have no idea what possessed me to just lapse 5 minutes in time, but it's never happened again in my life. As far as you know. I had just pulled into the parking lot of where I worked, and was walking towards the building. It was like 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight. All of a sudden, I heard an ambulance's siren start sounding. Naturally, I look down the road to try and see the ambulance. I see it approaching and decided to watch it for a bit. It was quickly getting closer and it was about to pass right by me. However, there was a large SUV waiting to turn out of the parking lot and onto the road, blocking a few meters of the road from my view. The ambulance passed behind the SUV, probably about 50 feet away from me at most, and I vividly remember the siren becoming completely silent in that instant. The ambulance had vanished entirely as it passed behind that SUV. I was so confused. The road did not have many cars on it at the time, and it was broad daylight. I did a triple take and made sure that I didn't just miss it. I had a clear view of the road going both directions, and there was no more ambulance to be seen. No more siren either. I walked up and down the road, trying to find it for a solid minute. But nope, it was gone. I was well rested, not on drugs, and I didn't have a history of hallucinations. It seems dismissible, but I was completely aware of what happened, and I can't explain it to this day. As someone who used to have such hallucinations, security footage helps a great deal. Also, a pet is really useful. If they aren't responding, I could relax. My friend Sarah was in a nightclub, drunk off her face, when she got an overwhelming urge to tell a total stranger that her leg hurts. Edit, it didn't. All a bit strange. She ignores it, but it doesn't stop, so she walks up to this guy and says, "I know this is crazy, but I've got a huge urge to tell you my leg hurts." "I know that's crazy, again. Sorry." But he bursts into tears. Turns out his dad had just died, and they made a pact before that if there was an afterlife he would get a message to him saying a totally random phrase, so there could be no mistakes, which they decided was "I've hurt my leg." What the hell? My wife passed away a year ago today. Had some odd things happen, like a couple of old meaningful pictures show up that I swore were in storage. The strangest one was I vacuumed the carpet, and as soon as I was done a diamond ring was on the ground right where I had just cleaned. It was like she was saying, "Hey, this one is real, don't lose it." I remember driving my car to this intersection in this rural area, and I'm checking both sides because of terrible blind spots. In the corner of my eye my mother is sitting there and says something like "It's all clear my way." I look back, and she isn't there. My mother had been dead for a few years at this point. This was also in the middle of the day, and I've never had it happen since. I was about 12 years old, and woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a leak. I walked across the hall to the little bathroom, hit the lights, and was about to reach for the toilet, when I glanced up, and saw a face in the mirror. It was not my face. It was as if someone was on the other side, standing to the right, with their face right next to the glass, staring at me. I only saw it for the briefest moment, but it is seared into my brain. I screamed, and ran out of there to find my dad. Of course, my dad investigated, then calmed me down, or tried to. We had a prayer session, because I was so freaked out. Eventually I must have gone back to sleep. Fast forward to my 30s. I'd forgotten all about the event. One night while visiting, my dad quietly brings it up. "Remember that one time you saw a face in the mirror?" It suddenly came back to me in a rush of memory, sending a chill down my spine. "Yay, I remember." "Well," he said, "I sometimes think about that night." He looked down at the floor with a serious expression. "I saw it too." He went on to describe exactly what I'd seen. We have no idea what that was. Apparently when he investigated, he saw it and had a freak out of his own. Apparently the prayer session was as much for his own nerves as mine. I respect him for keeping that tidbit from me till my 30s, but I kinda wished he'd never told me. Wow, that sent a shiver down my spine. That's so scary to think about. Imagine going back to your childhood home now and breaking the mirror. Instead of a flat wall, there's a little room behind it where somebody used to look back at you. That wall was on the outside of the house. Around 12 years old I was watching TV. Sitting there I noticed that the sun just turned off. Like completely. I was real confused, opened the blinds, and it was dark. Show was still at the same spot, but the clock on the cable box said it was 5 hours later. My best guess for what happened was that I passed out without realizing it, like those nights where you lay in bed and blink and suddenly it's morning. So I'm guessing I fell asleep sitting up for exactly enough time to have Cartoon Network play a rerun of the show get to the exact spot I fell asleep at. I think you just fell into a light sleep. Sometimes when I'm in the passenger seat of a car on a long drive I'll fall asleep listening to the radio. When I wake up, it feels like I didn't even sleep, and I can remember everything that was on the radio, but the other person in the car is certain I sleep. In college, I took a hard news/soft news journalism class where one of the assignments was to write an obituary for one of my grandparents. The professor told us to write it on a deceased grandparent, but if all of your grandparents were still alive we had to choose one. In my case, all of my grandparents were alive. I procrastinated actually doing the assignment until the night before it was due, because it seemed like a morbid assignment, especially once all of my grandparents were still alive. Scramming for an easy grandparent to write about, I gave my mom a call and asked her for some basic biographical information about my maternal grandfather. As we were talking about my grandpa's career, my mom couldn't recall the name of one of the companies he worked at. She lectured me about waiting until the last minute to write the assignment, because it was late, 10:30 p.m. my grandpa's time. However, she said she would give him a call to see if he was still awake and be able to answer that question once my assignment was due the following morning. When my mom called my grandpa, my grandma answered the phone in a panic. My grandma frantically explained that the paramedics had just arrived and were performing CPR on my grandpa because he had stopped breathing and lost consciousness. My mom was able to stay on the phone with my grandma until they took my grandpa to the hospital, where he was declared dead. In the time my mom and I had been talking on the phone about my grandpa's obituary, he was dying. His death was entirely unexpected at that. Although he was in his 80s, he was the healthiest of my grandparents at the time. We ended up using the obituary I wrote for that writing assignment as his actual obituary. Still freaks me out when I think about the timing. I had a very important document that I only ever kept in one place. I kept it in the top drawer of a small filing cabinet. I never moved it and would always see it in that drawer whenever I opened it for whatever reason. The day came that I needed it now, and I didn't sweat it because I knew exactly where it was. Well, I'd be damned if it wasn't there. Cue panic attack. I tore that filing cabinet up. I removed everything and spread it out, flipped papers over, dug through envelopes, shook everything out, shined a flashlight all through the emptied cabinet in case it was somehow stuck to the sides. I mean, it was not there. I can assure you no one took it or was messing with me. I was so frustrated. I even looked through other parts of my house. But I knew it wouldn't be in any of those places, and it wasn't. I was intermittently going back to that dumb filing cabinet. No luck. Super irritated, I searched the rest of the house again, and, on my way back downstairs where my filing cabinet was, I called out in frustration, "Okay. Bring it back." I don't know who I thought I was talking to because I was alone, but you guessed it. I found it in the top drawer of my filing cabinet, where it should have been in the first place. I was relieved and totally freaked out. On numerous occasions I've done something similar when I can't find something, even after looking for a long time in the place or places where it should be. I usually say something like, "I don't mind that you borrowed it, but I need it back now. Please put it in the next place I look." Oddly, this works more often than not. I don't think it's anything supernatural, but I don't mind hedging my bets either. Most likely, it's the act of pausing and taking my mind off the search for a moment that does the trick. So this has always bothered me. I was 13 years old at the time and my dad was a coal miner. He worked third shift, known as the hoot owl shift, which was midnight to noon. As such, he got home around 2 p.m. and slept till around 9, got up, had dinner with us, and left for work. My dad was always pretty gruff and constantly yelled at us if my younger brother or I made too much noise and woke him up after getting home from somewhere, which as an adult now I completely understand. So one day I did something to wake him up, I forget what. Anyways, he calls me back to the bedroom and I'm expecting to get a dressing down, but he just looked at me and said, "It's okay. Come over here and give me a hug." What 13-year-old boy wants to hug their dad? I kinda squirmed a bit, and he followed up with, "What if something happened to me and just laid there all grizzled and tired? I didn't hug him. That night there was an accident in the mine. He saved everyone on his crew, including the one person he went back in for. His was the only death, and I'm convinced he knew it was gonna happen. I'll never forget his eyes that day. If someone asked you for a hug, give it to them. I love you, Dad. That story is just very, very sad. It is to a certain degree. I've decided to look at it as he gave me one last lesson as a father. I'm a dad now myself, and everything I do for them is to teach them something. He also died a hero, and lots of other kids got their dads home that next day. About 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car, and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park, we both noticed two people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older looking professionals, both walking to their separate cars in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag, and the lady was further ahead than the man, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in, because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then all of a sudden it was like someone pressed play, and the two strangers just continued on like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised to each other that we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out.